So I try to avoid commenting on every single case that is similar to this because honestly, I'd have to make a video on it every single day. And there's just too many really to keep a rolling record of. Um, but nevertheless, I want to occasionally speak on issues like this because it's something I feel very, very strongly about. In fact, when it comes to domestic policies, domestic, let's say, legislation or domestic issues in this country, there are very few things that work me up and that I feel as strongly about as crime and justice. Um, Part of the reason for that is I've been a victim of serious crime myself. I know what job culture is, and it stays with you when you've been through that for a prolonged period of time, as I was. Um, I'm going to just read out the report. It's not too long. As usual, I'll quote the journalist and just read out the report, then share some of my thoughts. Because I think this is a glaring example of just how tone deaf our judicial establishment is. By judicial establishment, I'm talking about the courts, judges, and the system, for want of a better term. Um, I think you'd think they're on another planet with the decisions that are made. It's outrageous. It's a disgrace. And without further ado, I'm going to read this out, then elaborate a bit on my thought process. Bear with me. It's not too long, so bear with me. Drunk yobs attack Royal Navy sailor for trying to stop them stamping a seagull to death. I should say there's animal cruelty details in this, so do stop watching now if you think you'd be triggered by that. This is from the Daily Telegraph via MSN News. The report is by Eric Williams, and this is the report. A group of drunken teenagers attacked a Royal Navy sailor who tried to stop them stamping a seagull to death, a court has heard. Toby Boothroyd, an off-duty serviceman, spotted the four teenagers crushing the bird underfoot near Torquay Harbour, Devon. But when he and his girlfriend intervened, the attackers, Adrian Heaps, 19, Matthew Fardo, 18, Dennis Duman, 19, that's Dennis with a Z, and Charles Laybourne, 19, punched him to the ground and kicked him in the head as they laid defences. A Crown Court heard. Now bear in mind those ages because we'll come back to this. 18 and 19. So they're young men, they're adults, they're not young offenders. Mr. Boothroyd suffered a broken finger, multiple bruises, and needed stitches for a split lip following the assault last September. And no doubt there would have been, that's an awful ordeal for anyone to go through. No doubt there would have been, not post-traumatic stress. Certainly, it would have had a psychological impact. It would on anyone. His injuries meant he was forced to miss an inter-service athletics event, which would have represented the Royal Navy. So, this is something that people overlook with crime. It's not just the initial crime, but it's how it impacts the victim's life in so many other ways. CCTV footage played the jurors showed the gang attacking Mr. Boothroyd and police officers attending the scene, so they also attacked the attending officers. The group left the nightclub at 3 a.m. and were spoiling for a fight, the court heard. All four defendants admitted assault and causing actual bodily harm and were given 1 year of community orders and instructed to pay £150 compensation to each of the victims. It doesn't even say if that's 150 between them or each. Each it would be 600. I'm going to come back to this because it's an outrageous verdict. Or outrageous sentence, I should say. Heaps also admitted to a separate battery and the assault of an emergency worker, while Fardo admitted to two assaults on emergency workers. Simon Burns, prosecuting, said these defendants were spoiling for a fight and the catalyst for the violence was an injured seagull being stamped on. It led to drunken yobbish behaviour and sustained and horrific violence. Judge James Townsend, a useless judge, by addition, I might add, described the case as an appalling incident of sustained violence committed after the defendants had all drunk far too much. He added, violence of this sort, particularly kicking people on the ground, can lead to very serious injury or on some occasions death, and called the attacks on police disgraceful. The defendants were spared jail because of the rage, immaturity, and lack of similar convictions, the court heard. And that's the end of the report. because of their age, immaturity, and lack of similar convictions. Let's break that down a little bit. Their age, well, they're actually not young offenders. 18 and 19 means that they're young adults. They're men. So, I don't know how that's coming into it because they're not even young offenders. Immaturity, well, I'd say it's worse than immaturity. I'd say that is dangerous behavior. I mean, we're not talking about them playing some childish prank here. We're talking about violent behavior. Unless they had severe learning difficulties, which the report doesn't cite. That's something I just think is very questionable. Um, and the other reasoning was the lack of previous similar offences. Now, to me, that's ridiculous because if you murdered someone, should it be considered, oh, well, you haven't murdered anyone else, so it's the first time offence, so we're going to give you a light sentence? To me, that reads the same way. You just violently assaulted a stranger for no good reason, but it's the first time you've done it, so we'll give you a tap on the wrist. This judge is a disgrace, an absolute disgrace. And it really infuriates me because this is the thing that gets me. Judges usually acknowledge the obvious. In this case, he said it was a sustained and violent attack that could have led to death. In fact, there have been similar cases that have done just that. Up here in northeast England, in Cramlington 2 years ago, if you live in the northeast, you might be familiar with this case. Danny Humble. It's in the public domain, so I'm only reporting what has been reported. Young man, 35 years of age, kicked to death by a gang of teenagers. Um, you know, it's actually scary when you get drunk young men and they've got ego and they've got that sort of mindset. They're capable of anything. It doesn't matter if you're physically tough. I mean, this guy was a serviceman. He would have been physically fit. Thankfully, it didn't result in something worse than his injuries, but it could well have. It could well have. Um, I think it is an absolutely outrageous verdict. I think Judge Townsend is a disgrace to his profession. And the excuse is always, well, judges' hands are tied. Well, it is an excuse because it's true that judges follow guidelines from the Sentencing Council, which I think is a useless organisation. But what needs to be understood is they have aggravating and mitigating factors. They're presented with aggravating and mitigating factors. Now, what you had in this case was not just one, but several actual crimes. First of all, you have cruelty to an animal. In fact, I think the RSPB should get involved and sue them individually on top of it. That would be good to see. But you've got that cruelty to an animal. That takes a cruel, callous person to knowingly do that to a living creature. Um, then you have a violent assault on a stranger, a violent and sustained assault by four worthless cards, and they need to be told that they're cards. Young men who join gangs like this, they need to be told to their face that they are cards. They need to be shamed. Okay. Um, then you have, drunken disorderly. You have an attack on emergency workers. That's at least four different offences I can think of. Yet they get a tap on the wrist. Community sentence. Well, what's going to enforce it? They could just not bother to show up. Research has found that many community sentences, the criminal doesn't even bother attending. The fine, well, 150 quid really isn't that much. If they are on universal credit, if that's not even a full month's universal credit intake, and I know because I've been through the system, it's more than that. So that's nothing. It's absolutely nothing. If they're in work, it's even less. I hope they get fired from the jobs if they are. It didn't give any background information in that regard. There might be other reports on it. But whatever the case, whatever way you look at it, 150 quid is nothing. Now, even if it's from each defendant, that's 600. It's a bit of money, but given the gravity of what happened, this guy sustained serious injuries. It messed with his private life, because he missed out on opportunities in the Navy. It didn't say his girlfriend was injured, but she had to endure watching all of this. Um, and then, there's always the side that people don't consider, aside from the crime itself. there is no doubt the stress, the mental anguish, the anxiety that this guy would have faced afterwards. I know if it was me, I'd be going through all sorts of emotions. Anxiety, yes, also mental anguish, because I'd be thinking, how dare these people, these strangers, treat me like that? Frankly, I'd be wanting to pummel them to the ground, put my raw emotions to it. Now, you can't, unfortunately, because no matter how brave and tough you are, there's very few cases where an individual can take on an entire gang. Some might say it was reckless to do it. But, if we end up in a situation where good people don't stand up to thugs, then they take over. So I don't criticize him for doing it. I commend him for doing it. This is a brave man, a decent citizen, a man who's serving his country, who deserves nothing but credit. And I just hope that he can kind of move on and rebuild his life. But this decision is a disgrace. I don't understand how the judge himself can acknowledge the gravity of it and give them such a pathetic sentence. It just defies comprehension. I mean, unless these guys had serious learning difficulties, which was not reported, I cannot think of any sane reason to give them a tap on the wrist. And the danger with this is they'll then feel enabled, they'll go out and do it again. Now, I contacted the court in question, Exeter Crown Court. I knew it would be a waste of time, but I just wanted it for the record. Judges are impossible to contact. If you have a problem with your MP, people complain about politicians, but if you have a problem with your MP, you can write to them or you can vote them out of office, right? You have the choice to do that. If they stay in office, it's because the public want them to stay in office. Now, with judges, there's no accountability. I think this is a very serious problem. Now, I'm not suggesting that we should have an exactly American style system where every judge is elected, but I do think that consistently soft judges need to answer to the public. I don't think it's good enough just being sort of, well, it's in a court of law, they're the presiding judge, and the public should just put up with it. I mean, as it stands, if you feel that a decision is unduly lenient, you can write to the Attorney General. I'm not sure who it is at the moment. I think it was Mel Stride the last time I checked. You can write to the Attorney General of England and Wales. They can then refer it to the Court of Appeals, who reviews if it is unduly lenient. Very occasionally it's overturned and the sentence is increased, but most of the time nothing changes. So basically, if you, like me, are a member of the public who feel exasperated by the system, it's just, there's no empowerment. And these useless judges, it's like they live in a bubble. They cannot seem to understand how the public perceives us, or worse, they don't care. And I don't accept this argument that their hands are tied. Yes, they're following guidelines, but they are ultimately then making the decision to issue a lenient sentence or not. This judge could have given them a custodial sentence for GBH. He chose not to. That's on him. Shame on him. I personally think he should resign in disgrace. Because what he's doing is sending out the message that these four violent thugs are free to be in society, to be around civilized people, people who don't get drunk and violently attack strangers, and inflict cruelty on a defenseless animal. Absolute scumbags. But I think I'm going to conclude with a few thoughts. Um, on a personal basis, if I ever get into any sort of position of power, that is to say, if I ever get some sort of financial prowess, because a lot of activism, a lot of, let's say, lobby work involves a degree of organization, and that actually means capital, unfortunately. Tycoons can create great influence in terms of activism. I mean, look at the groups that are out there. They're being funded by millionaires, some pretty vile groups, I might add. I don't want to veer off on a tangent here. The point is, why is it just stop oil persist? It's because they're funded by millionaires. Now, if I'm ever a millionaire, I would certainly use some of my wealth to try and influence change. I don't know what I can do because it's a David and Goliath situation. It's very hard to shake up the system. But the Tories have been in power for 13 years. They talk tough, but too much of the system remains soft. Recently, the Ministry of Justice told me, because I had an exchange about this, that there's been a 25% increase in tougher sentences. It's not good enough. There has to be a 75% increase in tougher sentences. This is not to say that every single case is unduly lenient. Sometimes judges get it right and the sentence does match the gravity of the crime. Far too often it doesn't. There's far too many suspended sentences. There's far too many community sentences for crimes that really should warrant a custodial sentence. Um, and judges are not accountable under the RAB. Whilst he was Secretary of State for Justice, it was introduced that there would be televised verdicts. That is, the verdict at the end of trials, particularly for serious cases. That's good, better than nothing. It means that judges are on the spot. They know that they're being filmed. It doesn't actually make any difference, though, to what the verdict is, or rather, I shouldn't say the verdict, the sentence. So it's better than nothing, but it doesn't go far enough in terms of transparency. What I would like to see is weak judges put on the spot face a lot more public pressure. As it stands, like I say, there's really no way to hold them to account. Earlier, I contacted the court because it was the only thing I could do, and I wrote what I thought of this. Now, I'm not stupid. I didn't, um, I'm not going to threaten someone or something like that, but I did say I thought the decision was disgrace. It was like bailiffs at exetercrowncourt.com or something to that effect. I said, please pass this on to Judge Townsend because he needs to know what the public think of this. I do think the judges are in a bubble because, they hear the evidence and they hear the witnesses and the defendant and they're in that courtroom. But it's almost like judges don't read newspapers or I mean, that's probably not true. But you really would be led to think that because they're so tone deaf. They're so out of touch. And I want to shake them and say, what is wrong with you? Why are you so useless? Because to tell you something, if judges were elected, all these useless judges would lose their job tomorrow. Because the majority of the British public, if you done a vox pop on the street, I think it's safe to say the majority believe that our system is too soft. And I think that that gulf is a problem because it means that most people don't have trust in the criminal justice system. I certainly don't. We're not the worst system in the world, but we're far from the best. I don't know what the best would be actually. But you have extremes. You have like in Latin America where prisons are basically human battery farms. I don't think that's necessarily productive. But then you have the Nordic states. Their experiment is an extreme leniency. That hasn't worked either. Because violent crime in Sweden is on the rise. Now in Britain, we're not quite as lenient as the Nordic states, and we're not quite as hardline as some parts of the Americas and indeed Asia. Maybe we should be. Maybe we should be a lot tougher. I mean, I'm not advocating the death penalty at all, but there are parts of the world where criminals fear justice. Singapore, for example. And I'm not saying that any justice system is perfect. You could pick any system and there will be flaws in it. I support due process. I support people getting a fair trial. And I support humane treatment. But I do think there should be much tougher sentences for this sort of crime, especially for that sort of gang attack. It disgusts me to the core. And I just hope these criminals eat some humble pie. I hope one day they get picked on. Um, what I find hard to stomach is the fact that they're free. The fact that they probably think they've got away with it. Because, well, not probably, they have got away with it. They won't even bother showing up to the community sentence. It is so infuriating how out of touch judges are. Infuriating. And what can you do about it? I sent the message to Exeter Crown Court. That judge will probably never see it. They live in a bubble. Judges are in a bubble. People say, oh, they hear this stuff every day. Like the Sentencing Council on their website, they say judges are not out of touch. They deal with these cases every day. Yeah, they deal with them every day, but they don't have to deal with public opinion. They don't. Because it's not like the public can voice their opinion in the court of law, because then the proceedings would come to an end, for obvious reasons. So judges are protected from public opinion. I think that's wrong. I think they need to face the heat. I think they need to know exactly what the public think of them. It's infuriating. And I think that consistently soft judges should have their job on the line because it's not just that justice isn't being carried out, it's that it's actually endangering the public. When you get violent criminals like this put back out onto the streets, they're almost certain to do it again. Now, if they get 5 years in prison, yeah, they might still reoffend. But firstly, at least justice has been done. At least they've paid for what they've done. Secondly, in some cases, the longer that they're in there, the more, initially they're going to be bitter, but over time they might actually start to reflect on their lives and think, I'm here because of my own actions. That should be the guiding principle. So I feel utterly, utterly disillusioned. It's not that every case is like this. Like you say, you get cases where, for example, yesterday there was a guy sentenced to 44 years. Now he'd murdered a mother and her two children in an arson attack in Nottingham last year. Um, it's not the best sentence. He should have got a whole life tariff and never see the light of day. But he was in his 30s, so 44 years before he can be considered for parole. Basically, as a life sentence, he'll come out as an old man. That's more like it. Sentences like that should be much more commonplace. Now, I think a case like this, violently attacking a stranger, should be a minimum of 5 years behind bars. Minimum. But £150 and a community sentence, that's not justice. It's an absolute disgrace. And it's absolutely infuriating. I'll put a link to this. But I'm saying this, for a record, because if I ever do get involved in this in some capacity, it's useful to have stuff like this to point to. It's infuriating. Let me know your thoughts.